Morning. My name is John Schultz. I'm a Norvise ambassador out of the Park City, Utah area. I'm a stillwater junkie. I've tied some other stillwater flies for Norvise, but I'm showing a new technique and some new patterns of flies that I've had incredible success with. This fly today is going to be tied with black rabbit, and it's also, I'm going to use this brilliant black and red and blue dubbing from Hairline. It's called Midnight Fire. And the Midnight Fire woolly bugger pattern has been a favorite of mine for years, but once I started tying with rabbit, I couldn't find any combination to make it come out to where I could use it with rabbit. So I decided to put this together into a dubbing loop, and I'll show you how I do it. To start with, I'm going to take my rabbit from the end of the fur and trim it so it just tapers the end of the rabbit slightly, just so it doesn't look so square and unnatural in the water. And then from there, I've already dressed my hook. I'm using number 70 denier ultra thread today, but I'm going to I'm going to take my leather part of my feather of my fur and lay it over my vise and measure the leather for the hook shank length. That's pretty much my rule of thumb for building these flies. Then I'm going to separate the furs where I can get a good tie-in point on the leather and just dampen it a little bit so that it stays separated. The next thing I do, I'm going to use just a drop of super glue on the butt end of that hook shank, because I've had a lot of problem with these rabbit flies after the leather in the rabbit gets wet. They have a tendency to want to untwist in the water. So after I got super glue on there, I'm going to lay that right over. I kind of line up my thread angle right for where the barb of the hook is, and I hold it down tight, the leather against the hook shank with my thumbnail, and I'm going to do 6 pretty tight wraps, one over the top of each other here, to get this tail tied in good to where it's not going to untwist on me. And after I've got that, I pull the leather back a little bit and try and pinch a little bit more in under my thread there and get it tied in and with a few wraps, and then I'm going to throw a half hitch in there. After I'm at this point, I'm just going to make a fairly small dubbing loop and then advance my thread to the eye of the hook. I'm going to take my Midnight Fire dubbing, and I like to pull these fibers out lengthwise so you get as long of fibers as you can possibly get out of your dubbing. Slide that up into my dubbing loop. I'm going to put a little bit more down in the bottom. And you can add or subtract depending upon how bright you want this fly in the water. You can put more or less dubbing. So I like it a little subtle looking in the water, but this black, red, and blue combination is a trout killer, I guarantee. It really is a good functioning fly. Now I'm going to take my fly, and I like to offset my hook a little bit there so that my dubbing doesn't get caught in the hook shank as I go. Now I've got my dubbing loop spun out, and I'm going to try and stretch those fibers out just to make them a little bit as long as I can get them. After I've done that, the most critical part of getting these flies to tie out nicely, I think, is to take your leather and go over the top with your leather, one wrap, and make sure that the leather is flat down against the hook shank on the top. Then after you do that, I'm going to take the leather and my dubbing loop and put them between my thumb and my middle finger. That leaves my pinky finger or my pointer finger available to push fur back as I'm going. So now I'm going to start rotating this. Pull a little of that fur out right by the hook shank. I'm just got the dubbing loop is laid just to the side of my rabbit. Now that I've come up to the eye, I'm going to stop and lock that, and I'm going to force that fur and the dubbing loop back as far as I can. Now from there, I could almost have enough room for one more wrap, but I think I will place one more wrap around that. Now when I come up to the hook shank, I'm going to pull it back again, make it good and tight in there, and I'm going to take my dubbing loop and cross over the leather and go through it and make 2 rotations around that, and then hold it up, and that locks that leather in place while you tie your dubbing loop in. So now I'm going to do about 6 wraps on my dubbing loop again, just because I hate to have these things come undone on me, and they will if you don't overbuild them. I've got that pretty well tied in. I'm going to trim off my dubbing loop. I'm going to come back and I'm going to wrap over that dubbing loop again quite well to make sure that it's really well tied in. Throw another 1/2 inch in there at that point. Now just run my thread back right behind the eye of the hook, and then I'm going to take my rabbit fur and go one more wrap over the top. After it gets over the top, I'm going to take my scissors and separate that fur. Again, put a little moisture in it, and then I'm going to cross over the leather part of that rabbit fur, separating the loose piece and the fly into 2 pieces. Then I'm going to do another 6 nice tight wraps over the top of that leather to make sure that that is anchored in pretty well. Now I'm going to trim that off. And I'm going to build a nice thread head over the top of all the leather and the dubbing loop there, getting it totally tied in there good. I've tied these with eyes on them so they look more like a minnow, but fishing them, I really don't feel the difference in quality of catchability with the eyes on the hook, and they're not worth the effort for this. I think in saltwater, where the fish really focus on eyes, it's probably worth doing it. But for stillwater, freshwater fishing, I don't think you do it. Now I'm going to come back and I'm going to put about 6 whip finish knots, and then I'm going to do 6 more on top of that, just to make this as solid and tight a fly as I can possibly get it to be. Take it, trim it off, and take my 22 caliber dubbing tool out and comb out my fly. And if you can see just the subtle bits of black and red and blue in that, this fly in the water, when you strip it, just comes to life. It's so alive and fishes so well, it's amazing. I fish it on my intermediate and my type 4 and my type 7 sinking lines, and it's caught some terrific fish for me in the last 1.5 years that I've been tying it. So give it a try, you will like it. Thanks much for watching.